Hello and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event. I'm Eric Lorber, the director of Rain Taxi. We're a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. And if you're viewing today and don't yet know much about us, I invite you to check out our website anytime to learn more about our quarterly magazine of critical writing, our event series, our chapbook publishing, and all the other programs we do to promote literature. To do everything we do, Rain Taxi earns funding from places such as the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board. The latter is made possible by the voters of Minnesota, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Their support helps keep all of Rain Taxi's events free, but we also need support from individual readers like you. So if you're able to pitch in a little something, please use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. And please know that even a small gift makes a big difference. There are lots of other ways to participate today with us. You can use the chat column to send your comments and observations. If you have a question, put that in the Ask a Question box, and we'll get to those as well. And then best of all, you can buy the book. And today we are launching our chapbook, Crops. So wherever you are in the world, you will be able to get this. It is such a delight to have this here and to welcome the two people responsible for it, author Grzegorz Kwiatkowski and translator Peter Constantine. I first learned of Grzegorz' work because a dear friend turned me on to his music with the band Trupa Trupa, based in Poland. And I was immediately caught up by his dark lyricism and not surprised to learn that he was a published poet in Poland. And then finding that translators like Peter were interested in bringing his work to English led to the culmination of this project. Peter, of course, one of the tribe of translators that makes access to world literature possible for all of us who only might have English as our language. So to both of you, thank you so much for this work and for joining us today for this launch conversation. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you and hello, and it's a really great important moment, and I'm super happy that it's happening and that it happened because the book is out. So thank you, dear Eric and Stephen and Rain Taxi and dear Linda. And yeah, it's a miracle. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Grzegorz. To begin, why don't you tell us a little bit about the background of yourself, which I covered very, very briefly, if you wish, and also about this particular group of poems, which is marvelous and haunting and very unique. So.
Yeah, if they are very unique and marvelous and haunting, I think that they are because of great translations of Peter Constantine, and it's great honor to work with him. So I would begin from mentioning about Peter, that I'm really happy to work with him. But yeah, this poetry is about rather dark stuff and about dark, tragic history. And I live in Gdańsk, in the north of Poland. This is the city where the Second World War started. This is also kind of a post-German city with a lot of German influences, such as for example, Arthur Schopenhauer or Joseph Eichendorff. Or Günter Grass, who lived and was born in Gdańsk. So, on the other hand, Gdańsk is a city where the Solidarity movement was established. In Lech Wałęsa is from Gdańsk, and he still lives in Gdańsk. And Solidarity movement crushed in a big way the communism system in Europe. So, communism regime. So. For many years, I didn't care about my city in the way that I thought that I'm perfectly isolated from everything. But of course, it was untrue. And so I'm really son or child of my city, which is, so this poetry is a combination of stories from Gdańsk and from this land, because Poland is the place where one of the biggest genocide in the history of the world took place. So Action Reinhardt. So there are a lot of ghosts in the air in some way, and I believe in the role or the model of artist as kind of a sponge, that I'm responding for this ghost in the air. So I'm talking about my family. My grandfather was a prisoner of concentration camp Stutthof near Gdańsk. His sister was a prisoner of Stutthof concentration camp. So it affected all my family. Also, my wife's family has got very tragic history of hiding during the Second World War. So it all affected my poetry, and but the bigger master for me was an American writer actually. So Edgar Lee Masters and his Spoon River anthology was for me the biggest book, maybe the biggest book in my life. So he showed me the way of writing about biographies, and in very short, lapidar, direct way. So in some way, I'm trying to. I'm also his pupil, and I'm trying to speak about the horrors of the past, because I think that by trying to understand this tragic past, we are working on better future. And I think that if we are facing the tragedy from the past, we can try to be better people. And I think that once we will discover that the evil is potentially in every one of us, there is a space or place for moral awakening. So of course, now I can say about it, because when I'm writing, I'm writing. I don't think about anything such as these things. But when I'm, for example, reading translations, then I think that that's really the point of this poetry. It's not about archaeology or history, or it's about human conditions, and for example, a terrible ability to killing each other, and this kind of very very dark stuff. But I'm staying optimistic, because I really believe in communication and of changing things for better. And I think that also this Zoom event will be one of these kind of meetings. So because I was talking a lot of about poetry, so maybe we will read some poetry, and maybe Peter would read the, in my opinion, most important poem from this book, which is opening the book, and which is called Burning.
Yeah, thank you, Grzegorz. I shall read, and this indeed is a brilliant introduction to this book. I think this poem really sets the tone. So, Burning. Where are Isaac, Moshe, Wefa? They're all asleep here beneath the soil. Where are Rachela, Stefan, Alexander? They're all asleep beneath the soil, in Stavitsky, in Tikochin, in Radziłów, in Troshkin, in Yedavne. He had butchered 18 Jews. He told me this is in my apartment as he installed my stove. And the sun still shines upon his house and the generations of his family. You raped a Jewess behind the mill, and then you slashed her throat. In the village, he is greatly respected, despite being a bachelor, despite being decrepit. And to this day, a sign hangs on his door: Jews, gypsies, and devils not welcome. He hit a child with an iron rod, brains splattering upon his clothes, and made its mother clean the mess. He worked in the fields, toiling late into the night. He was kind to his dying mother. Let us judge him not in his hour of need. They began beating her, turning her white body black. There was so much chaos in those days. Such everyday misdemeanors and transgressions might now seem something not particularly special. O Lord, thou pluckest us from their hands, burning, burning in the barn, burning. I must say, actually, I was touched as I was reading, and I was so touched that my tongue got mixed up. I will read these very important lines, 3 lines. There was so much chaos in those days, such everyday misdemeanors and transgressions might now seem something special, which I think is very important.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. It's an extraordinary opening, and I know I might have said this to you, Grzegorz, when I first read that manuscript, it seemed to me like an overture to this work, and I'm curious if you planned that, and also Peter, how you approached that as the opening poem of the book.
Well, if you'd like me to say something about that, this poem is a late arrival. It was the last poem of this group of poems that is in this book that I translated. But when Grzegorz sent it to me and we worked on it, translated it, it became clear that it is the beginning that sets the tone for the different voices that this book has. People who have been victims of the terrible atrocities back in World War II, people who accepted them, people who were part of them. And I think that is, in a way, what also makes it compelling, I thought, a very, very different approach to facing what the Holocaust, what happened in the Holocaust, how people were involved in different ways. And that was so interesting, because so many decades after that, so many people have dealt with this issue. And now I think Grzegorz has brought a new and very, very original and compelling and very distilled look at some of those things. And those of us who are from those areas, meaning Grzegorz from Poland, myself from a Slavic village right on the border in Austria, we have experienced similar things, where we've grown up. Our parents and grandparents were victims or Mitläufer. In other words, they played along or accepted what was going on, or in fact perpetrators. And one lives in a village, almost like that poem that I just read now, a village where everyone you come across was either somebody who was almost murdered or had their family murdered, somebody who looked the other way when it was happening, or somebody who held the gun in their hand. And this is a very problematic experience that has to be looked at and faced.
Yeah, I think that this mechanism of facing the truth is very important, or our version of truth. But yeah, facing the truth and facing the facts, and to speak. I really love the process of uncovering things that are covered, for example, by culture, by nature. So we are I try to uncover these in some way obvious things. Unfortunately, and yes, so and this is the very Central European landscape, unfortunately. And on the other hand, also genocide is part of human nature, and this is most tragic thing, that if you will face it, this not only great things about humanity, but also this worst parts. And I think that if you will face this worst part, then, and if you will find in yourself this evil, not a hero, but this evil potential, I think, for example, I found in myself these kind of things, and I was, it was shocking for me, I didn't say that, of course, I would be on the side of, heroes. I thought, oh, very probably I would be on the side of perpetrators, So for me, it was a very shocking knowledge, and for me, it was like a moral awakening. But I think that also this poetry has got the role of of a memory. I'm spreading the memory, about victims mainly. That we shouldn't forget about people who were murdered and were victims. So it's kind of a spreading from generation to the generation this memory about these poor people that
Yeah.
died.
And you make it very specific. So many of the poems are named for the person who speaks. How did you choose these different people, these ghosts that you talked about earlier? How did you decide which of the voices, of the many voices that you would present?
Yeah, I think this is art of montage. I think this is this is the most important moment. Of course, I don't know, or I don't know how to describe it, but I just know what is this edgy moment that I have to, stop and take a note and do something with that. So in some unconscious way, I'm searching for this edgy, moral, tragic moments, and when I think, all right, this is it. This is not enough for me, but it's too much for me. That if I hear something or read something, and it's my mind is blowing, it's too much for me, then I think, all right, I found something, that I found something, because I'm almost rejecting it. So very, very rapidly I'm writing it down, because I can feel that my cultural side would like to leave it and go, to play with my son, for example, which is a great thing, of course. Yeah, and maybe I will give a sample of for our audience of a Polish version of a poem, and Peter, you would read English version, and then I would read few more in English, and then we could talk.
Great idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, if I may say, I would after what you've just said, I would love to read Buzia Weiner,
All right.
because I think that is a poem where a 6-year-old writes her own obituary, and I think clarifies what much of what you were just saying.
Okay, so I will read in Polish, and yeah, and unfortunately, it's not my imagination, but these are real. These were real people. So, Buzia Weiner. Miałam 6 lat, kiedy mnie zabito, a moja siostra Szulamit lat 4. Po stracie rodziców włóczyłyśmy się w okolicach Rokitna, nauczyłyśmy się spać na polu, a z czasem zakradałyśmy się do obory i piłyśmy z sutków krowy mleko. Nie miałyśmy kalendarza, więc nie wiedziałyśmy, kiedy przypada data naszych urodzin, dlatego przez pomyłkę obchodziłyśmy na pewno więcej niż raz w roku to smutne święto.
So, Buzia Weiner. I was 6 when I was killed. My sister Sulamit was 4. After we lost our parents, we wandered around Rokitno. We learned to sleep in the fields, and with time crept into cow sheds and drank milk from the udders of the cows. We didn't have a calendar, so we didn't know when it was our birthday, and ended up celebrating more than once a year this sad celebration.
So I will, because there is maybe 2 more little poems which unfortunately works as a pair. So the first poem is Ranger Dance. During the war, we laid out bodies like wood, but after the war, we laid out wood in the forest like bodies freshly felled. And the second poem is called World. I went with my child to the forest and cried helplessly with him. Tears dripped from my eyes, and the child wiped them away with his hand, and I so regretted that I had brought him into the world. And when I'm reading this kind of a poems in translation of Peter and you know, because it's as I said earlier, in my opinion, it's not only about history, but it's about the present time. And for example, now on the eastern border of Poland, between Poland and Belarus, there is one big tragedy, and people are dying in the forest, and little children are dying in the forest, because Vladimir Putin and Lukashenko took these people from Iraq. They told them that they can easily go to Western Europe, and suddenly they are in a trap on the border. And the point is that so they don't and they are not accepted by Polish government and European Union. So European unions say we can't open the borders. Polish government says we will not open the borders. And the most shocking thing is that the most of Polish society says it's all right, that we will not help them, and they are dying. So this is these kind of things are happening, all the time, unfortunately. And of course, there are some people who are helping, and they are great big heroes, and they are right now there, and they are bringing some food and clothes because it's colder and colder, so people are freezing in the forest. And yeah, but I'm just saying that unfortunately, this bloody mechanism of history is more and more visible right now. And yes, I'm just saying about that because I thought if I should protest or I can protest in some publicistic way, and then I thought that in some way my poetry, I hope so, is doing this thing. Even if I'm talking about the past, I'm still talking about these very tragic events. And my ideal situation for a model situation for a reader is that someone is reading it and we've got kind of a moral awakening and moral shock situation, and then someone is trying to help, for example. And in the past, for many years, I was a coordinator of Amnesty International. So in my life, I wrote thousands of letters to the prisoners of conscience, and then I went to the territory of pure art in some way, and then I thought that maybe I betrayed my human rights roots. But now I think that maybe this is the same thing, and I just want to do which I am doing the best. Anyway, I wanted to say about this Belarus horror, Polish Belarus horror here, because there are a lot of listeners. So and there are ways to help and to, for example, in financial ways. So if someone doesn't know about it, you should check this situation, and maybe you will be able to help.
I'm very glad you said that, Grzegorz. And I assure you that readers of this poetry will access the present nature of it. That it's not that these are not historical documents, but living. The point is that these ghosts are still speaking. And that they need to be speaking because we need to hear them. So, but in your comments was embedded something that we have a question about, which is the nature of protest, or this work as a form of protest. And if that's our questioner is asking that if it's fair to think of them as a form of protest, do you have an affinity with prior artistic and political movements that were bringing together protest and art? How did that interest simmer for you?
my experience with a mix of politics and politicians and art is very bad in the way that, we in Poland, I think we really don't like politicians and politics, and for us this is very, there are almost no good politics, and it's so simple. But of course, we have to choose some of them. But it's very, we had so many years of communism regime that we are really still in some way very affected by this time because of corruption and because of lack of trust to each other. So I prefer to think about art of protest without participations with political movements. For example, in Poland, I don't know, for sure in the United States it looks different. For example, great movement Black Lives Matter, but as far as I know, Black Lives Matter wasn't a political movement, right? It was a people movement, or not?
Yeah,
I
that's
don't.
fair.
Yeah. So these kind of movements, of course, are great. But if some politicians are using even people's movement to their cynical ideas, and in Poland it's very, very often it takes place that politicians are using artists or people to their cynical games. So we are really afraid to have a marriage with politics.
Right. And Peter, how much of that political background or even historical background was part of your process? Because something that really struck me about these works is how elemental they are, how both unspecific and specific they are at the same time. So I was curious what you went through in terms of bringing them into English and how much of that in the background was part of any of your process.
Yes, well, so I must say that Grzegorz is a poet with a very wide range, and what we see here is a collection that approaches these old and new problems. And as I quote him and in fact I would probably, let me see, I quote him in my introduction at the end, sort of saying that beware that what you see here is still happening, right? I mean, it hasn't really gone away. So
Yeah.
that is one thing. But how the way I encountered Grzegorz for the first time was here at the University of Connecticut. One of our undergraduate students had translated him, Michał Jabelski, call him, and very successfully. They were poems about I think Japanese monkeys in a spring, right?
Yeah.
So very, very different and really fascinating in quality, rhythm. And this undergraduate student, who was American but of Polish origin, had done a wonderful job, and the poems were published in New Poetry in Translation. So I was fascinated. I did not intend to translate Grzegorz, but one of the Greek publishing houses saw these poems that Michał had translated, and then asked me whether I could do translations of a collection. So I would say, until quite recently, I would have said that I am the modern Greek translator of Kwiatkowski. I'm not the English translator of Kwiatkowski, but I'd done English poems also these poems to show Grzegorz like what I was planning to do. They were almost like let's say translation samples. You can't read Greek, but this is what I would do with this poem. So that was also how that started, which is relatively unusual, maybe. In other words, to provide an English translation so that you can see what a modern Greek translation is interpreting. And then what happened was that, to my surprise, you, Eric, reached out and said, "Hey, we have this collection here. Should we do it?" And that's that day when you said that is when I became the American translator, or let's say the English language translator, because until 5 minutes before you'd said that, I thought I was just the Greek translator. So.
And was there any pivoting in terms of the audience? I mean, maybe not, but do these poems come across differently for a Greek audience or even a European audience, and for an English audience or an American audience?
Well, I must say, so the occupation during World War II, the German occupation, Nazi occupation of Greece was absolutely brutal. And I, as a child in Greece in the 60s and 70s, being of Austrian background and speaking German at home and in the street, really felt that, because in the 60s, people still remembered. It was only 20 years after the war. So you had people in their 30s, 40, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s who had faced the terrible brutality of the Nazi occupation. So the poetry, I think, speaks to a Greek public in a different way to an Austrian public, because the Austrian public, particularly where we're from, which is the border region, the triangle right between Czech Republic and Slovakia, where we're all Slavic, actually, and it's called withered weed, suche trave, anyway, as well. It has a Slavic name. But what I mean is that the experience there, a German reading of the poems or an Austrian reading is again very different, and probably would mirror what a Polish reading might be. So I'm very pleased that you asked this question, because I think an American, a British, Greek, Austrian, German, Polish public all tap into these universal poems and all understand the horror in a personal way, but maybe a slightly different way. And I hadn't thought of that, but that's definitely how it would be.
And let's use that to pivot a little to some of the formal and artistic elements of this work. One, Grzegorz, that really knocked me out right away is how Peter used the word distilled earlier, and that's a very good word. They are almost haiku-like in sometimes. They're so brief but so compressed, as if this horror could be brought down into just a few words or a few lines. And I'm so curious about that. And also, I hear in it, it's connected to your music a little bit. So what is that? How do you distill the language, with these big things to these relatively small poems?
Yes, so there are a few things about that. So and all part of them are kind of an accident, because the first thing is that I'm writing the poems on this mobile phone, and this is a broken mobile phone. It's Nokia, very old Nokia. It's not connected to any yeah, I can call. It's just that mobile phone, and the point is that it's very, very old, and it's very hard to to click and to stick these buttons, and it's super hard. And so I write the poems in as SMSs, short message, and the one SMS has got kind of, I guess, 100 signs. You know what I mean? It should be very short, because so, for example, if I've got 10 thoughts in my head, I have to, and I'm in a car or in a tram, or so I have to make it super lapidar, because I can't write it down. So I'm trying to make a condensation very, very, very quickly, and then it's very hard to, even this short version, it's very hard to write it down. So while I'm writing, I'm trying to condensate it even more radical. This is one point. The second point is that, kind of, for 10 years or longer, when I started to listening to all works of Glenn Gould, I fell in love with his art of playing and art of dynamic, and for me very neutral, mathematical, almost invisible style is the best style, in the way that it's almost invisible and it's anti-melodramatic. It's, you know, it's so less is more, and if the poem is so close and it's very tragic, but it's so close that it's almost invisible, I think that then the readers thinks, all right, it's, you know, the readers have to make his own narration, because you are giving him only little signs, and he have to reconstruct it inside of himself, you know, because it's almost broken, this poem. And I think that the less is more, and then the reader can make something with this very lapidary structure. So Glenn Gould with his methodologies is my master. And the second thing is that my methodology of writing is that then I'm taking these little notes from this mobile phone to my computer, and I've got one document, only one document. Now this document has got kind of, I don't know, 5,000 pages, and I'm rescanning this document nonstop, in the way that every day it's kind of a 329. I'm going up, and every day I'm scanning, and then all around, and then for example, 3,500, then I'm beginning from the first page and going up. And so in some way I'm still rewriting these little poems or rereading these little poems from different periods. And that's why we've got this big variety of topics, because they are from different periods. But the point is to make them as little, as direct, as delicate, and in some way as close to moral, edgy thing, but also to you know, that they should be beautiful, you know, because this is art. It's maybe a bit perversive idea, but this is an art. This is not pure document, and that's the point, that every poem should have its own great music, and I think this is most important.
Yes, and when you read earlier in Polish, that was so evident, and so it's amazing to hear this background about it, and to think of the piano being Glenn Gould's broken Nokia phone as well. That makes so much sense. We have a question from the audience asking about this music, though, and hearing you read in Polish, hearing the cadence and the music. Peter, how much of that was part of your process? How were you attending to that music when you were creating the translations?
Oh, so for me, there is a timing, an incredible timing in the poems. The one that I read, the 6-year-old announcing her own obituary, that she was murdered, for instance. The way it comes, where the verbs are, the way the information comes across, is that timing, which I think is very, very important for dramatic effect if we're going to look at it objectively. Of course, there's more to it than that, because that makes it sound like it's something technical that Grzegorz chose to do, which of course he might have. It is art after all, not just clear expression. But because the timing is so interesting and so effective in Polish, when you have a poet or a prose writer who does that, and I think Anton Chekhov, who's my favorite author to translate, because of that as well, there is that incredible timing. And as Isaac Babel, the other great Russian author, said, you know, there's nothing as violent as a period that's put at the right place. And I think that I see those elements in the poetry, which is why the poet takes you and directs you as the translator, and if you mimic those rhythms, then you're there.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I interrupt, but I think that the rhythm and the music is really most important. And in some, because these crops poems are from 4 books in Polish, from book called Radości, then Spalanie, Sową, and Karl Heinzem. And I'm calling these 4 books anti-Wagnerian tetralogy. You know what I mean? That it's of course I love music of Wagner, you know, but my idea was that it would be anti-Wagner, that it would be totally opposite and totally down and totally calm and totally, but still with a lot of emotions, but still bursting in some way and blowing, but made in opposite way. In some way, as a kind of a moral protest, you know, against Wagner, but the rhythm and the music is for sure most important in art. And for example, when I read some book which is talking about, and this is artistic book, and this book is talking about very important historical issue, but it's written in a bad way. The music is not good. I know that I will sound very not nice, but I don't care about the book. I don't care about the issue. You know, if there is not a rhythm, I feel bored. You know what I mean? I think that the music is most important. I don't want to say that I'm great in this thing, but I just wanted to say that I love to. I'm searching for a music in literature. That's maybe most important.
Absolutely, yes. Key to the poetry. Grzegorz, I wonder if you would read the title poem, because it's such a great example of so many of the things you've been talking about, and also how important setting is in this book.
Yes, all right. Yeah, so these are very mixed. For example, this title poem is about Rwanda, and but maybe someone will think about, but it doesn't matter in the way that it can be about Poland. You know, it can be about Rwanda. It's about human beings in tragic situations. Crops. Our real work is farm work, not killing. Although I admit, the massacres in the swamps have the rhythm of our seasonal labor, and when the rains were heavy, we did not go out for crops. Yeah, so this is what can I say? You know, it's super tragic. And on Friday I've got this workshop on Oxford University focusing on Rwanda, and another problem is how to, when you're facing with evil and with dark situation, how are you responding for that? Because, for example, for many days now, I read a lot of books about this tragic and documentary movies about Rwanda, and I found out that I'm more and more angry. You know what I mean? That I'm just, when I see little kids, you know, dying on this, it wasn't kind of all right. I understand the mechanism of genocide. I understand, you know, but I found out that the mechanism of hatred starting to open in me. You know, that I'm close to say something like, you know, fuck you, etc. But yeah. So it's always very delicate and complicated process, but I think we should face these terrible things.
Yes, and the what you've just said does relate to another question from the audience, which is about how politicians use censorship essentially as a weapon against people, and that we've certainly seen that censorship of or even just trying to control the discussion of the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, now in the United States, the horrors of racism that we live with, and that attempt to control the discussion is something that artists like yourself are fighting against, or trying to undo the censorship or the control that is being placed upon us. So do you have a sense of yourself as doing that work and as sort of being outside the law, on that, outside what they want to control?
I know that they want to control, but and they try to control, but I think that everyone should just make their own thing, and in some way that don't care about politicians. That you have to make your own thing and try to do it in the best way, and try to find a way how to spread this art, of course, because especially in this kind of countries, post-communistic countries as Poland, it's a big problem to find a way for your art and find a way. But it's not only a problem with politicians. For example, in Poland, I heard from many people, and from many critics, and for many years, that, for example, I shouldn't write about history, that the poetry shouldn't deal with history. Poetry is not about history. Don't touch it. And it sometimes these were nice advices. Sometimes it was kind of like, oh, please don't do it. So, but of course I didn't care. But there is a, and for example, when there will be kind of publication of a great poetry book about history in the Western world, in Great Britain and USA, then part of Polish critics will change their opinion, and they said, this is a great idea too. So I wanted to say that it's very, because you said about censorship and politicians, so these are very, very frightening things, and we should we should not be worried about them, because we should make our own thing. But the other thing is that we should really believe in our stuff, and be so self-assured about it, and protect it in some way. You know what I mean? Protect the spirituality of your art, and try to make something with it, especially in this in Central and East Europe, because there is no big industry. You know what I mean? In music, or even in literature, this is all still very corrupted after this big period of communism. So, yeah.
Those are wise and encouraging words. Peter, were there, as we head toward the close, I'm just interested in if there were particular challenges that you found in bringing these poems to English, whether whether those apply to any of the registers Grzegorz has been discussing in terms of facing the brutality of this of what these words are conveying. But any particular moments that that challenged you as the translator?
Well, one thing that I found interesting was that so for the last, actually it turns out 40 years, for the last 40 years I've been translating from various languages into English. Greek is a new experience in the last couple of years, but it is the country I grew up in. It was, in a sense, my first language, along with German. And my father's English, but I never lived in England, so there might be vestiges of an English accent when I speak, but I think it's mixed in with other things. So, but I found that the poetry was very, in Greek, it really sounded like that Kwiatkowski is a Greek poet. He's one of us. He speaks our language. I find also that translating Russian into modern Greek, that there's an affinity. I don't know if it has something to do with the music of the language or the complexity, because the grammar, Polish grammar, is very complex. I will also say that Grzegorz uses Polish grammar in an interesting way, meaning, for instance, the titles are partial words that sometimes come in grammatical forms, which is very, very, very interesting in Polish, which you can do in Greek, but you can't do in English. So English was a little bit more challenging, but one of the great things is that it is wonderful to work with Grzegorz as well. So two things happen when we work. One is actually three things. One is he will say, I want you to interpret it. You know, give the poem an afterlife, a second life in English, which makes me a little bit worried sometimes. But on the other hand, when I do ask, then he will talk about what's behind the poem. And the third thing that sometimes happens is also when Grzegorz feels that the poem needs a sort of that if he'd written it in English, maybe that he would have added another element. That this would be fine. So in some cases, the English poems are sort of recreations. Although I think that happens very much with the current poetry that I'm translating, because I'm continuing to work on different poetry. And I think now there are certain poems that I would have loved to do, but that are fully understood, that they live completely in Polish. Same in German. But here there is something missing, so one needs to maybe add something to make it an English poem, so that becomes a successful English poem. Yeah.
I just want to say that many people, and I will not say the names, but many great American and great English writers finds translations, Peter, not many people, but I just want to say that writers, feels that these translations are really, brilliant, but they are reading them as an English American poetry. You know what I mean? They are. It's not like a translation, but this is like a thing which was always written and created in English language. And I think this is the biggest achievement. And Peter is, he's a great artist, and that's the point. And I knew about it in the way that that's why I told him, that please do whatever you want to do with idea of this poem, for example, and I've got a feeling that maybe even English translations are better than Polish originals, and I don't mind. I think it's always like that with great translators. So I'm really happy to work with Peter, and we are working already on new poetry. So maybe it's not a secret.
Yeah, well, I must say that's very kind of you to say that. But I would also say that I'm not a creative translator. I do stick very close to the originals.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that.
But so it's not me wandering off, and these are Peter Constantine's poems inspired, by Kwiatkowski. So that's not it. No, I would say I do try to stay very, very close. But I can give one example, for instance, the poem that's not in this collection, that there is a woman speaking, and a Polish reader would understand that she's German. They would understand that she was part of the prison camp elite, that she was part of what was running, and the English would not. And it was such an amazing poem that I asked Grzegorz, I said, really, for us to do that, we need to have a contextualization. So he offered an English, sent a whole line. So if the poems appear together, I don't know if he's going to add the line to the Polish, I don't know. But if they appear the way they do now, you will find that my version is, in fact, 2 lines longer, because it has that moment there, which the poet has done. In other words, it's not me taking action, but it's the poet has felt that for his American and British audience, this would be necessary. Otherwise, the poem would mean nothing. It would be misunderstood.
Yeah, but the point is that now it wouldn't be misunderstood, but now it's better poem. That's for me a shocking knowledge. Now it's for sure better poem than in Polish. This example is so. Of course, we work together and we talk together. It's and we analyze everything. But if it's amazing that this creative process is so. Yeah, so for me, this is an amazing thing.
Absolutely. And again, I will say that I'm heartened by your conclusion there, Grzegorz, because in being a better poem, it is because it communicated more fully to its audience, and that lets the audience tap into that moral capability that you referred to earlier. That is the ambition of this work. I praise you for it. I'm honored to publish it. And I thank you both for this wonderful conversation. We're pretty much at our time, but this is a slim but important volume, and I think for many will be, and many English speakers will be an introduction to your work, and I hope it propels them to find more about what is happening here. Thank you again, both. I want to thank our audience. We've had such great engagement and questions, and I hope people will be interested in following up, and as well check out the future events that we have coming up as well. Thank you again, both. It's been such a special way to launch Crops.
Thank you. Thank you
very much
for inviting us. Thank you. And thank you, dear audience.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.